Good morning, ma'am. At the outset, I would like to thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Most welcome.
And today, I will be talking on nutrition in hematological malignancies, and most of the things which I attended the program, and most of the common things about the nutrition have already been covered. So my job is really simple now. And it's just a brush up of all those things which have been taught in 3 4 days. And with me, Ms. Swamita Mishra, who is also the nutritionist in our department, funded by Cuddles Foundation, who's taking care of pediatric oncology nutrition, shall also be discussing one interesting case which we had in our department, so that an example will be given to you that how to, in a real world experience, how to manage the nutrition in pediatric oncology cases. So, as we all know, India has the third largest burden of hematological malignancies across the world, and it comprises of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, acute leukemias, and solid tumors. But the among after US and Europe, we are the third largest. We have the third largest burden in the world, and nutrition holds a vital place in the management of hematological malignancy. Poor nutrition is directly proportional to the adverse outcome because it leads to poor tolerance of chemotherapy drugs and increased risk of life-threatening infections during treatment. I should re-emphasize that our treatment is one of the very difficult treatments because when we give chemotherapy, majority of patients go in severe neutropenia. Severe neutropenia meaning thereby that the absolute neutrophil count goes less than 1500, and 90% of the patients during chemotherapy have at one point of time experience a ANC absolute neutrophil count less than 500. So you can imagine that the body's defense system is already collapsed, and on the top of it, if the patient is malnourished, then it leads to severe complications, and it's at times very difficult to manage them also. And proper nutritional assessment and rehabilitation is the key to successful outcome. And I will show you with the scientific evidence which we have right now that how important is nutrition in hematological malignancies. So this is the life cycle of a cancer patient. So you can see here that when the patient comes to us with active cancer, it is not for hematological cancer, in fact for any cancer who is attending your clinic. So ACT means the active cancer treatment. So when we give the treatment, either the patient is cured, or at times there is a waxing and waning course. Many times the patient is uh, does well, but over a period of time there is again a cancer recurrence, and again a chemotherapy is given, again the disease comes in remission. So this is a usual course in our hematological malignancies also. And with time, as the time passes, the risk of progressive nutrition also malnutrition also increases. And in between, the patient has to spend on supportive care interventions like packed cell transfusion, platelet transfusion, palliative care for pain management, other things. Plus the patient is depressed in itself. So many factors are taking into play picture and leading to difficult outcome and increased risk of malnutrition in this group of patient. So as an oncologist or as an hematologist, our duty is that right at the beginning, when the patient is diagnosed with cancer, we should be really cautious in maintaining and managing them, making their nutrition plan and managing and ensuring that they are strictly complying to our nutrition plan. So, what are the catabolic alterations in cancer patients? So, the most important thing is that most of the cancer patients, almost 95% of the cancer patients, will complain that they have inadequate nutritional intake. They usually say in your OPD that doctor साहब भूख नहीं लगती है. And we then, as a physician, we should assess that how much really, मतलब, it's a very subjective thing that when a patient tells you that भूख नहीं लगती है, what is the exact caloric intake of that patient? That is the first step of when we are managing such cases. And if we see that if the estimated energy intake is less than 60% of the requirement for more than 1 to 2 weeks, then that should raise a red flag sign, because that is the patient group that is going to have severe malnutrition during the treatment course. And what are the causes for that? The first one, most important, is the primary anorexia, because of the disease, because of the cytokines that are released during the cancer, because of the cancer per se, that leads to the evokes the vomiting center of our CNS, thereby leading to constant sense of anorexia. On the other hand, there are many secondary impairments which are also have to be tackled by the physician, like oral ulceration due to chemotherapy, xerostomia due to radiotherapy, then poor dentition, and many of the chemotherapy drugs have side effects like diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, reduced intestinal motility, then the cancer pain and the side effects of the other drugs. So all these things come into play when a patient is when you are treating a cancer patient and you are focusing on the nutritional aspect of that case. So we have to, as a physician, address all these issues one by one, so that we can increase the dietary intake of those patients. So just a few words about the cancer cachexia. You must have gone to this terminology previously also, that what really is cancer cachexia. So it is usually the loss that is associated when the patient is diagnosed with cancer, and it's a biological, the researchers have shown that it is not only because the cancer induces a vomiting center in the brain, and that leads to decreased food intake and constant sense of anorexia all the time. And additionally, there are many cytokines released in various cancers, be it hematological, be it solid tumors managed by radiation or medical oncology department. That the cytokines are TNF, IL-1, IL-6, interferon, STAT3 pathway, that leads to insulin resistance, decreased synthesis, increased breakdown of the protein, and decreased nitrogen loss and increased lipolysis. So you see these patients with severely malnourished, loss of weight, and other side effects. So muscle protein depletion is the hallmark of cancer cachexia. So how is it assessed? That is most important thing, because when you see a patient with cancer, you often see that the muscle mass is almost gone. There, you just see a skeleton standing in front of you. Majority of patient, especially if that is a GI malignancy or a hematological malignancy, the patient lose the weight quite drastically within a period of 1 to 2 months. And we should, as a physician, first step is we should assess the degree of wasting or the severe depletion of muscle mass, and it can be done by simple as measuring the mid upper arms muscle area by anthropometry, and with men less than 32 centimeters square, and for women 18 centimeters square, depicts severe muscle wasting. Or you can do it through appendicular skeletal muscle index determined by dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. These are the some technical investigations which we are not really practicing at presently at our institute, but uh, according to the SPIN guidelines, it is being recommended. Or you can do it through lumbar skeletal muscle index determined by oncological CT imaging, or whole body fat free mass index. So these are difficult to practice, but if you say, if some researcher is really working on the oncology nutrition, then probably these define the more objective criteria rather than just measuring the mid upper arm muscle area by anthropometry. The second important thing, as I previously showed in the slide, that during its cancer cachexia is a systemic inflammatory response, that many cytokines are released in the body, and what is the end result of this is the protein effect on the protein metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism, and lipid metabolism. The protein metabolism is systemic inflammation is associated with altered protein turnover, a loss of fat and muscle mass, and an increase in the production of acute phase proteins like CRP, C-reactive protein, raised ESR, and other things. With the carbohydrate metabolism, you tend to see insulin resistance and impaired glucose tolerance. And there is capacity for lipid oxidation is maintained or even increased in cancer patient, especially so in the presence of weight loss. So the more the lipid oxidation, it's not a good thing, and it has a several deleterious effect during the therapy. So when it comes to scientific evidence, this slide I have just recently published paper in the Hemisphere, one of our good scientific journals, and it have directly shown that in hematological malignancies, with a patient, they have compared two groups of patients, the one with the BMI less than 23, another with more than 23, and you can see that the Kaplan-Meier curves are distinctly different. The lower one, the red one, is showing a poor survival, where the upper one with 105 patients showing the better survival. And additionally, the patients who had no decrease in weight, who were nutritionally well managed during treatment, had really a significant improved survival with a p-value of 0.01 in comparison to the patients who had more than 3 kg weight loss, had the worst survival during treatment. And in the same paper, they objectively assessed that whether the food intake during treatment was no decrease, whether moderate decrease, with a severe decrease. The three categories they objectively analyzed by the quantifying the amount of food, and a nutritionist playing a key pivotal role in maintaining the compliance to the diet chart that he or she had given. And they have shown that the patients who have no decrease in the food intake during entire treatment had better survival. So these graphs in itself say that how important the nutrition. It's not only the chemotherapy or the supportive care that is important. More important is also equally important, at least, is the nutrition of the patient. And this is the another important meta-analysis that was published in JCO, Journal of Clinical Oncology, and they have also emphasized that in low middle income countries, because in developed nations, when we see the incidence of malnutrition is really the pre-existing malnutrition is very low, but in low middle income countries this incidence rises to the tune of 20 to 30%. And when the patient gets diagnosed with cancer, that he or she comes with again a super added insult of malnutrition on the top of the pre-existing malnutrition. So as a result of this, almost 50 to 60% of our patients are malnourished at the time of diagnosis in low middle income countries. So why is assessment required? So I have already discussed that nutritional assessment is important for prevention, recognition, and early treatment of malnutrition, because the later you do this thing, the more will be the morbidity, and lesser would be the outcome benefit of managing such cases. And this I had already shown that due to the main reason, in especially this becomes very important in low middle income countries if you are practicing oncology in these countries, because the baseline poverty, inadequate diet is already there in the population, leading to pre-existing malnutrition at the time of cancer diagnosis. Now, what is the clinical manifestations of malnutrition apart from the muscle weight wasting and weight loss? When the patient gradually drifts towards the severe malnutrition, there is a lot of fluid accumulation. There is impairment in the absorption metabolism of nutrients, and usually these patients have a tendency towards chronic diarrhea, decrease in production. The immunity is all lost. And on the top of it, when you give the chemotherapy, then the WBC count dip further. So there is always an increased tendency for infection, and there is impairment of collagen synthesis and altered osmotic equilibrium. So what should be our goals of nutrition therapy? The first most important is the prevent and reverse nutrient deficiency, preserve lean body mass, help patients tolerate treatment better, minimize nutrition related side effects and complication, protect the immune function, decrease risk of infection, and aid in recovery and healing, and maximize the quality of life. So when we design a nutrition care plan, we call it as a ABCD. And stands for anthropometry, B for biochemical parameters, C for clinical science, and D for dietary evaluation. And I will just in brief, because all this has already been discussed by Dr. Moniak and Dr. Afzal, so I won't be taking too much of time in that. So anthropometric variable, we know that weight is one of the most important criteria when we assess in the OPD, daily OPD. So we assess whether the patient's weight is appropriate for his or her age. Then height, then mid-arm circumference, triceps skin fold thickness, and head circumference in children less than 3 years of age. And these are the standard cutoffs laid down by WHO, World Health Organizations, and these are the cutoff. The value between 110 mm to 120 to 125 mm indicate moderate malnutrition, and even if less than 11 mm, that is 11 less than the mid-arm circumference is less than 11 centimeter, then it depicts severe malnutrition. And similarly, the weight measured daily, whenever the patient comes to show you in the OPD, you should daily monitor the weight, because just by having a look and physical appearance of the patient, you cannot judge whether the patient is really malnourished. So it has to be done on a digital weighing machine, so that you can accurately monitor whether even 500 grams of weight loss is significant if it is happening within a period of 3-4 days or a 7 days time. So you should be, it raises a red flag sign. And height is also important, though it depicts chronic malnutrition. It is not a marker for acute malnutrition, but height should also be measured. On the top of it, the height and weight is also very important because we need to monitor the chemotherapy dosing is also based on the body surface area. We have to calculate the body surface area for each and every patient before administering chemotherapy. So if the weight and height are not measured accurately, then you tend to give either a higher doses or a lower dosage of chemotherapy drug. Now, these are the anthropometric indices: weight for age, height for age, weight for height, and weight for length, and BMI, and mid-arm upper circumference, and TSF percentile. And so these are the Z score values that are again laid down by WHO. So if the
There is a lot of background noise. Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself.
So this Z score, there are predefined growth charts on which we calculate whether the patient is his patient's weight is appropriate for his or her age. In adult patients, we take into consideration the BMI, the body mass index. In small kids, we take it as the less than 6 years, we take it as weight for height and height for age in these children. And these are the WHO charts. You can just, these are just for your reference, that you can just plot on each visit. You can plot the chart and you can say whether the child is going to the right road, or it's below the third centile, or below the first centile, below the second centile. And that can, the red line depicts that if the patient, the child, I think there is a lot of background noise.
अरे इसी में क्या नाम है उसने भी ये वाला न्यूट्रिशन वाला ज्वाइन करा था हम तो नीरज ग्रुप में ग्रुप मतलब उसको पास करा हेलो हाँ
So various formulae to calculate the energy expenditure requirements are the WHO, which is energy requirement is your basal metabolic rate into stress factor, and the energy requirement is calculated by resting energy expenditure that includes thermic effect of food, physical activity, growth plus stress or fever. So these are the recommended, they are laid down guidelines for recommended dietary allowances. These are standard. Nothing is so new about the cancer patient, thus we have to comply to the normal basics of nutrition in dealing with cancer patients. So in our clinic, Swamita is managing most of our oncology cases, and she is doing this in this way. The first step, she calculates the resting energy expenditure, and through this table and this formula, we can calculate the things and calculate the exact caloric requirement for that particular patient. And then second step is we calculate the thermic effect of food: 0% for full parental nutrition, 5% for continuous enteral feeding, and 10% for bolus feeding and eating normally. Then the third step is physical activity. If the patient, how physically active the patient is. Majority of our patients are either bedridden, or they are usually they have a light activity, so we calculate it as 10%. And fourth step is growth. In growing children, like in pediatrics, this takes into account a lot of important aspect, because in adolescent age group as well as in the pediatric age group till the age of 8 years, we take the growth is really growing fast, the child is really growing fast, and we have to take this into account. And finally, the stress of fever or sepsis or post-operative case. So this is how we calculate the energy requirement, and Somita will be showing you as a case demonstration how she has done all that. Now the protein requirement, again, this is the standard guidelines in an oncology patient. I would recommend that if the patient, because of anorexia, we have to, as a clinician, emphasize on increased protein requirement, because we are giving the drug, there's a lot of protein catabolism, muscle wasting going on, and we should ensure that the patient is advised usually to have a high protein diet. Now coming on to the cancer treatment options, these are the we usually give chemotherapy. Many patients undergo bone marrow transplant, targeted therapy in the form of rituximab. So I shall be dealing these three mainly aspects, and surgery and radiation therapy not usually in our patients, because it's more in the solid treatment. But these patients, and I shall be just discussing what peculiar side effects you have to address in our patients. And the most common side effects are the mucositis, because the moment we give some high dose chemotherapy, the child, it develops, the whole mucosa gets inflamed, and it it's difficult. The ulcerations develop in the oral cavity, and as a result of which the food intake decreases drastically. So many a times we have to start in patients with grade 3 or 4 mucositis, we sometimes have to start the TPN also. Then the neutropenia, febrile neutropenia is another main issue, because majority of our patients during chemotherapy, the counts drops to less than 500, and thereby leading to fever, high grade fever, and nausea, vomiting, constipation are a few important side effects, because majority of our patients are given the drug like vincristine that induces severe constipation and nausea and vomiting with anthracyclines, which we are commonly using in almost all our patients, like daunorubicin, doxorubicin. So these are the drugs. Melphalan, the drug which is used in myeloma, is highly emetogenic. So that's the challenging part of the nutritionist that comes, because we are giving all the chemotherapy drugs which are very highly emetogenic, and still as a nutritionist we have to ensure that the patient during the treatment maintains his or her nutrition. So just few important advices as a physician which you should keep in mind, that what mucositis you should advise to the patient. We usually advise soft bland diet, avoid foods that irritate the mouth. What are those food items? Like cold drink, Pepsi, Coke. These should be irritated drinks, should be totally discouraged. Then the patient, you should not be asked to have too much of a spicy food, and the food should be really soft and tender. The patient can well have a vegetarian as well as non-vegetarian diet. There is no restriction in that, but it should be cooked diet. And we should increase the fluid intake, because the common advice is that in summer months right now, which will be setting in, so we usually advise that the patient should at least be taking 2 to 2.5 liters of fluid every day, irrespective. So we advise कि आपको 1 या 2 घंटे पे 1 glass पानी जरूर पीना है. And add on nutritional supplements, and we can calorie dense them by adding some additive like Pediasure or other protein supplements which we can be given. Then oral glutamine supplement has been shown in few cases that it reduces the incidence of mucositis, and we are usually using it in patients who are receiving high dose methotrexate therapy, because that contains around 20 to 25% risk of mucositis. And if the mucositis is grade 3 and 4, then the pain is very severe, so patient can't have anything orally, then we give the pain relief medications in the form of constant continuous infusion fentanyl. Along with it, we start the total parenteral nutrition, so that the patient doesn't go into irreversible catabolic state. Then comes the neutropenia. Then what important advice you should give as a patient with neutropenia? And in neutropenia, we should teach the patients and family members how to wash and the importance of maintaining hygiene in the form of, you should always wash your hands the way we are doing during this COVID pandemic. Avoid any raw vegetables, fruits without peeling off the skin. And the common advice which we say, that anything that has gone through fire, you can eat that. Anything that has not gone over fire, you cannot eat that. Like if any fried thing, roasted thing, or boiled thing, you can easily have. You don't have to think twice before having it. Yeah, there's no harm even in neutropenic patient. But anything raw in the form of vegetables or fruits without peeling off the skin under strict asepsis should not be given to these patients, because they have high propensity to develop loose motion. And yeah, the meats and seafoods should be cooked at a higher temperature, let it remain cool. We should avoid unpasteurized dairy products and avoid salad bars and buffets. So these are the important advice which we give, and in all our discharge summary also, these advice is added in the patient's treatment advice. For the nausea and vomiting, majority of these patients, we usually give antiemetics in the form of ondansetron or Perinom. But still, some patients say that they don't feel like eating anything, and in that case, we usually advise either a peppermint or lemon flavored sweets they should keep always in their mouth, so that they have some sort of better taste in their mouth. And if in case, we should counsel them that you should take small diet feeds rather than taking big feeds. Suppose the patient's usual dietary intake is 3 chapatis during the lunch, so we can say, we ask them that you take 1 chapati only, and then after 2 or 3 hours you can have another light snack, so that small frequent meals is the advice which we usually give to these patients. And we should avoid too much of fatty and fried foods. Diarrhea is another important thing because majority of these patients, because of severe neutropenia, develop the atrophy of the intestinal villi, and majority of these patients, the moment they start having milk and milk products, they start having severe lactose intolerance, as a result of which they start having loose motions, and many times it becomes quite severe. So we usually, in patients with severe neutropenia, we discourage them in taking a very high lactose content diet and plain milk. So we advise that you should take more of a yogurt or curd, so that it is safe and it is full of probiotic. It has a probiotic effect also. So majority of the patients are shifted in, and we advise that you should take in, especially in our transplant patients who are during the conditioning regimen, when their counts drop down to zero. So in those transplant patients, we usually give a lactose free diet for a period of around a week, when the neutropenia is quite severe. And along with that, we supplement that with zinc, because it has been shown that zinc really is helpful. In many researchers have shown that it leads to regeneration of the intestinal mucosa. And high starchy foods like potato, that's our common practice, that boiled potato with salt and pepper sprinkled on it is a very good diet that we usually advise to these patients. And khichdi with ghee or oil poured over it is also a good way of making the food items more energy dense. And anorexia, I just would repeat that we just give antiemetics to control this problem. Constipation is another important issue which we have to take care in our patients, because many of the chemotherapy drugs have this prominent side effect, and especially the vincristine, which we are using in majority of our acute lymphoblastic leukemia patients. So in those, we advise them to have insoluble fiber, which are good for constipation, and drink at least 10 to 12 glasses of liquid daily, and have a physical activity. Now I hand over the session to my colleague Somita Mishra, who will be giving you one case study on the nutritional management of steroid-induced hypertension in B lymphoblastic leukemia with leukemic arthritis. And this is a real case scenario, and she has very beautifully explained that how she approached this case. Over to Ms. Somita.
About the disease, B-cell acute lymphoblastic leukemia is a clonal malignancy disease originated in a single cell and characterized by accumulation of blast cells that are phenotypically reminiscent of normal stages of B cell differentiation. This factor of BLL are the history of paravirus B19 infection, high birth weight, and exposure to environmental toxins. These risk factors can reduce abnormal DNA methylation and DNA damages. In the wake of medical improvement, increasingly more risk factors have been discovered for BLL. Minimizing these risk factors could therefore lower its prevalence. Over the last few years, the cure rate of BLL has substantially been raised. Despite this improvement, relapse rate maintains at across more than 15% of patients with BLL. Now, coming to the case, prior to the admission, in May 2020, child had complaints of fever every 15 days, and each episode lasted for about 5 to 7 days. And then in June 2020, child had again complaints of fever and also joint pain and swelling. These joints were for hands and bilateral ankle joints and elbow joints. Child also had a complaint of patchy rashes or on the body for 1 month and easy fatigability. Date of admission was on 11 December 2020. The protocol that was followed was BFM 95, and the phase of treatment was induction phase. And the clinical signs that were present at the time of admission was pallor present, swelling of left elbow joint, and small joints of hand present. Now the case progression. The first interaction was on 12th December 2020, and on assessing the child, we was having severe thinness, and child was taking 54% of the requirement that was calculated on the basis of 24 hours dietary recall. And then after that, planned oral feed of 80% at initial level, and then targeted to reach the total requirement as per the intake of the child with time. And on 18th December, after 2 days of steroid started, child had steroid induced hypertension, and so the diet was modified, taking into consideration the sodium level. And then on 24th again December, 24th December, the first chemo VCR and daunorubicin was given, and then on 25th the child was restarted on steroid. And then on 31st December, second dose of chemo, PCR and resolution was given. And lastly, on 6th January 2021, sorry, I am mistaken by 20th, discharge type was planned, and it was 100% of the requirement. Now, the baseline anthropometric assessment of the child was age 12 years 5 months, weight 25 kg, height 138.5 centimeter, BMI 13.0 kg per meter square, MUC 13.5 centimeter, and the grade of malnutrition that was coming was severe thinness according to the BMI. These were the biochemical assessment that were recorded. Hemoglobin 7.0, and then at initial level, and then it increased to 9.1 gram per DL. Serum albumin was down at on 11th, but slowly it rised up. And these were the clinical chemistry. Sodium was initial 126, but on 20th, when the child had a steroid-induced hypertension, it was raised to 126.2. Now, I will be discussing this slide afterwards. Dietary assessment, 24 hours recall and recall calculation. On 7:30 a.m. tea 1 cup, biscuit 4 pieces, 11 a.m. chapati 1, dal 1 cup, rice 1 cup, vegetable half cup, 1:30 p.m. milk 200 ml, 4 p.m. biscuit 4 pieces, and on 6 p.m. tea 1 cup, 9 p.m. chapati 2, dal 1 cup, rice 1 cup, and vegetables half cup. The total calories the child was meeting was around 1234 kilocalories, and the protein was calculated around 35 gram, carbohydrate was 66 gram, and fat 39 gram. Short-term goal, medical nutrition therapy for the case was short-term goals to manage adverse effect of neoplastic drugs, to help in meeting the nutritional requirement of the child, to provide situation-based nutritional therapy. And the long-term goals were to help in weight management of the child, to utilize the nutritional care process to provide an appropriate and high-quality nutritional care, to help the child to recover from severe thinness to a well-nourished child. The requirements that were calculated were fluid was around 1600 ml was calculated through Holiday's agar method, energy 1850 calories, 80% of the total RE, and protein 62.5 gram, that is 2.5 gram per kg body weight, that was coming around 14% of the total calorie requirement. Carbohydrate 292 gram, that is 65% of the calorie, and fat 42 gram, that is 21%. The intervention that that was planned on when the child was admitted was around 1487 kilocalories, protein 60.9 gram, carbohydrate 208 gram, and fat 37 gram. This was the diet plan that I had given. 8 a.m. milk plus Heptin biscuit 2 pieces, milk was 100 ml. 9:30 a.m. dalia or upma 1 cup, softened milk with softened milk and or lassi. Softened milk or lassi I will provide to the child, as I'm working in Cuddles Foundation, and Cuddles Foundation provides every child coming the IPD or OPD daily milk or softened milk, etc. So softened milk and lassi was given around 200 ml. 11:30 a.m. milk 200 ml, bee protein 2 scoop. 1:30 p.m. dal 1 cup, rice 1 cup, curd 1 cup, and ghee 1 teaspoon. 3:30 p.m. chapatis 2 pieces, veggies 1 cup. 6 p.m. Heptin biscuit again 1 piece, and 8:30 around chapati 2 pieces, dal 1 cup, veggies 1 cup, ghee 1 teaspoon, and at 10:30 p.m. milk 100 ml. This was the intervention done when the child was admitted. And then now coming to the this was the patient's vital chart history after starting of chemotherapy. As you can see, child was started on chemotherapy on 16, but on day 2, that is on 18th December, child had a steroid-induced hypertension, and you can see the systolic and the diastolic parameters raised from around the systolic was around 168 in the beginning, and then slowly came down, and diastolic also was around 107, and then 15, and then around 100, and slowly with time slowed down, and child was on child was started on amlodipine 2.5 mg twice a day. So intervention 2 was done, and this was the intervention done. Steroid induced hypertension. On steroid induced hypertension, the diet that was planned was 8 a.m. milk 200 ml, bee protein 2 scoop, 9:30 a.m. dalia or upma 1 cup, 11:30 a.m. Sofit milk milkshake 200 ml, 1:30 p.m. Sago khichdi was incorporated half cup, and 3:30 p.m. curd or threatening biscuit was given. 5:30 p.m. aloo tikki or boiled potato 2 pieces. 7:30 p.m. mixed vegetable soup 1 cup. 9 p.m. dal 1 cup, rice 1 cup, chapati 2 pieces, veggies half cup, and ghee half teaspoon. And around 10:30 p.m. milk 100 ml. The total energy calories that this diet plan was giving around was 1479 kilocalories, protein 55 gram, carbohydrate 203 gram, fat 43 gram, and I recommended the salt per day was 3.5 gram, and the sodium calculation of the whole plan was around 383 mg, and sodium from salt was around 1400 mg. Now the recommendations: avoid refined flours, fried food items, avoid pickles and papad and chutney, avoid preservative food items, have plenty of water intake, no added table salt in diet, avoid saturated fats like butter, ghee, dalda, etc. Now the discharge diet that was planned on 6 January. It was a meeting. Child was planned. Diet was planned 100%. As the child has increased appetite, and the plan was like this: 8 a.m. milk 200 ml, bee protein 2 scoop, with almonds 4, soaked at night. 9:30 a.m. aloo paratha 2 or chapati with vegetable, or dalia veg dalia. 11:30 a.m. laddu made of ragi flour mixed with chia seeds and one laddu. 1:30 p.m. dal or kadhi 1 cup, rice 1 cup, ghee 1 teaspoon, and 3:30 p.m. chapati 2, veggies 1 cup. 5:30 p.m. boiled chana, boiled green moong 25 gram, and then 7 p.m. rava halwa or poha half cup, and 9 p.m. dal 1 cup, rice 1 cup, chapati 2 pieces, veggies 1 cup, and with ghee 1/2 teaspoon. At 10:30 p.m. milk 100 ml and sugar half teaspoon. The total calories that was child was meeting was around 2013 kilocalories, and protein was around 66.6 gram, carbohydrate 283 gram, fat 48.9 gram, and the sodium calculation was 222.5 mg, and salt 1 teaspoon was recommended as child was on amlodipine. So now the recommendations: recommended high calorie and high protein diet, and for snacking, high protein snacks recommended like besan laddu, nuts, roasted chana, chikki, etc. Avoid extra table salt and sugar in the diet, and during the steroid phase avoid simple sugars. Counsel to maintain sanitation and hygiene. Follow the planned diet and do not skip any meals during the day. During the induction phase, fruits should be avoided, and later on thick skinned fruits should be allowed. Counsel to avoid junk and other outside foods, avoid spicy and oily foods, and maintain the daily fluid requirement. Now this was a consolidated anthro and an intake chart from admission to discharge. On the 12th December, the child's grade of malnutrition that was coming was of severe thinness, but day by day you can see on 1st January, it was around the weight of the child from 25 increased to 26.4 kg, and the BMI also from 13 raised to 30.8. So the grade of malnutrition from severe thinness came down to moderate thinness. And on 6th, the child was measured, weight height was taken, and the weight was around 26.7 kg. And MUC, you can see also the MUC has also raised. On 12th, it was 13.5, and but at the time of discharge, the child MUC measured was 14.3 centimeter. So the total grade of malnutrition was moderate thinness at the time of discharge. Take-home messages: nutritional rehabilitation is a key to successful oncology treatment outcomes. The risk of treatment toxicity and infection during therapy is directly proportional to the nutritional status of the patient. All cancer patients should be carefully assessed for malnutrition before embarking any anti-cancer treatment. And individual accurate nutritional plans should be made during the therapy. Careful monitoring and compliance to the nutritional plans should be ensured by the oncology nutritionist. So the references. Thank you.